A Werewolf Shifter Romance, written by Amelia Hart. Chapter 1. Blood on Innocent Hands. Era had learned 3 years ago that invisibility was the best survival strategy for an Omega working in the royal castle. Keep your head down, your voice soft, your movements quiet. Blend into the stone walls and wooden floors until the nobles forgot you existed. It had served her well, this self-imposed erasure, until tonight. The corridors of the castle's servant quarters were dim, lit only by scattered torches that cast dancing shadows on ancient stone. Era carried a small basket of dried herbs, feverfew, chamomile, willow bark, requested by Beta Jasper for what he'd described as a persistent fever. She'd been surprised when the request came directly to her. Jasper was the Alpha King's most trusted advisor, a man whose word carried weight in every corner of the kingdom. He could have summoned the royal healers, could have demanded attention from far more skilled hands than hers, but he'd asked for her specifically. The young woman from the kitchens, he'd told the head housekeeper. The one with the gentle touch and knowledge of old remedies. Era's grandmother had taught her about herbs before she died, back when Era still had a village to call home. That was a lifetime ago, before she'd become just another orphaned Omega, wandering from place to place, looking for somewhere safe to disappear. She reached Jasper's door and knocked softly. No answer. A thread of unease wound through her chest, her wolf instincts prickling with something she couldn't quite name. She knocked again, harder this time. "Beta Jasper? I brought the herbs you requested." Still nothing. The door was slightly ajar. Era pushed it open slowly, and the smell hit her immediately. Copper and iron, thick and overwhelming. Blood. Fresh blood. Her basket fell from nerveless fingers, herbs scattering across the threshold. Jasper lay on the floor in a spreading pool of crimson, his tunic soaked through, multiple stab wounds visible even in the low light. His eyes were still open, still aware, and when they locked onto hers, desperate recognition flared in their depths. Era dropped to her knees beside him, hands hovering uselessly over the wounds. Too many. Too deep. She pressed her palms against the worst of them, trying to stem the flow, but blood welled between her fingers, hot and relentless. "Beta Jasper, hold on. I'll get help. His hand shot out and grabbed her wrist with surprising strength for a dying man. His lips moved, words coming out in broken gasps. "Bloodline. Of the moon." He coughed, and blood flecked his lips. "You need to run. Before they discover what? Who did this to you?" But his grip was already weakening, his eyes losing focus. He tried to speak again, his mouth forming shapes she couldn't quite make out. Something about hiding, about danger, about bloodlines that should have stayed buried. Then his hand fell away, and the light left his eyes completely. Era sat frozen, her hands covered in his blood, her mind struggling to process what had just happened. She needed to call for help, needed to find the guards, The door slammed open behind her. 4 guards poured into the room, weapons drawn, and the scene they found was damning in its simplicity. The Beta Jasper, murdered in his own chambers. Era, kneeling over his body, her hands and dress soaked in his blood. "Step away from him." The lead guard's voice cracked through the air. I found him this way. I was trying to help." "Step away now!" Era raised her blood-slicked hands in surrender, scrambling backward. One of the younger guards circled around her position, and his sharp inhale made her stomach drop. "Captain, there's a knife here, under her apron." No. That was impossible. She hadn't. The guard held up a blade, its edge wet with blood. It must have been kicked under her skirts during the chaos, planted there by whoever had actually committed this murder. "I've never seen that before," Era said, her voice shaking. "Someone else was here. They must have..." "Seize her." Rough hands grabbed her arms, wrenching them behind her back. Iron manacles clicked around her wrists, the cold metal biting into her skin. Era tried to explain, tried to make them understand, but the words tangled in her throat as panic clawed its way up her spine. They dragged her from the room, her feet stumbling over the threshold, leaving bloody footprints on the stone floor. Other servants had gathered in the hallway, their faces a mixture of shock and horror. Era saw Cook Margaret's hand fly to her mouth, saw young Thomas's eyes go wide with disbelief. "I didn't do this," Era called out to them, desperate for someone, anyone, to believe her. "I found him dying. I tried to help." "Save your lies for the interrogators," the captain said coldly. The dungeon was everything nightmares were made of. Damp stone walls that wept moisture, the smell of old fear and older suffering, darkness so complete it pressed against her eyes. They threw her into a cell and locked the heavy door, the sound of the bolt sliding home echoing in the silence. Era curled up on the thin layer of filthy straw that covered the floor, her blood-stained hands trembling. This couldn't be happening. Jasper had been alive when she entered the room, barely, and his killer must have fled just moments before she arrived. Someone had planned this, had timed it perfectly to ensure she would be the one found at the scene. But who? And why? The hours bled together in the darkness. Twice a day, guards came to question her, their methods growing progressively more brutal when she continued to maintain her innocence. They wanted her to confess, wanted her to explain why a lowly kitchen servant would murder one of the most powerful men in the kingdom. She had no answers that satisfied them. On the third day, a priest came to her cell. He was middle-aged, with kind eyes and a soft voice that seemed out of place in this hell. "Child," he said gently, "I'm here to offer you the comfort of confession. Whatever sins weigh upon your soul, the gods will grant forgiveness if you speak true." Era sat up slowly, her body aching from days on the stone floor. "I have nothing to confess, Father. I didn't kill Beta Jasper." The priest settled himself on a wooden stool just outside the bars. "Tell me what happened then. Sometimes speaking the truth aloud can bring clarity." So she did. She told him about the request for herbs, about finding Jasper dying, about the words he'd gasped before death took him. The priest listened without interruption, his expression thoughtful. These words he spoke, "bloodline of the moon." "Do you know what they mean?" "No, Father. I don't speak the old tongue. They mean bloodline of the moon." The priest leaned closer, and something in his voice changed, became sharper. "Did he say anything else? Mention any names, any places, any objects of importance?" A chill ran down Era's spine. There was something wrong about his intensity, about the way his eyes had gone cold and calculating despite the gentle tone. "No," she lied instinctively. He died before he could say more. The priest, or whoever he really was, studied her for a long moment. Then he smiled, and it didn't reach his eyes. "I believe you, child. I think you're exactly what you appear to be. A simple servant caught in circumstances beyond her understanding." He stood, brushing dust from his robes. "May the gods grant you peace in whatever comes next." He left without offering any actual comfort or prayer, and Era's unease crystallized into certainty. That man had been searching for something specific, probing to see if Jasper had shared secrets before dying. And her ignorance had just saved her life, at least temporarily. 2 days later, everything changed. The cell door opened, and the dungeon master appeared with 2 guards. "You're to be prepared for execution," he announced without preamble. "The Alpha King has returned from his northern campaign and ordered judgment be carried out." Era's blood turned to ice. "When?" "Within the week. But there's been a change. The king's brother, Lord Cyrus, has argued that waiting risks allowing your conspirators time to attempt rescue. The execution has been moved to 3 days hence, under the full moon. 3 days. She had 3 days left to live. They dragged her to a washing room, where rough hands scrubbed the worst of the filth from her skin and hair. They gave her a clean shift to wear, white linen, the traditional garment for those about to face the headsman's blade. Then they returned her to the cell to wait for death. Era spent those 3 days in a haze of disbelief and terror. She'd had a hard life, yes, but she'd never imagined it would end this way. Executed for a crime she didn't commit, with no one to speak for her, no one to mourn her passing. On the final night, she barely slept. Through the small barred window high in her cell, she could see the moon rising, full and luminous. It seemed to pulse with light, and Era found herself transfixed by it, unable to look away. "I'm innocent," she whispered to the moon. "If there are any gods listening, Any spirits who care about truth? I'm innocent. The moon offered no answer. Dawn came too quickly. The guards arrived with first light, unlocking her cell and binding her wrists with rough rope. They led her up from the dungeon, through corridors she'd once walked freely, and out into the castle's main courtyard. A crowd had already gathered. Hundreds of people, nobles and commoners alike, packed into the space. A wooden platform had been erected in the center, raised 4 feet above the ground so everyone could witness justice being served. Ira's legs nearly gave out when she saw the execution block waiting at the platform's center. They hauled her up the wooden steps. The morning sun was bright, almost blinding after days in darkness, and Era had to squint against it. She could see faces in the crowd, some angry, some curious, some merely bored. To them, she was entertainment, a cautionary tale, a break in their daily routine. The executioner stood to one side, a massive man in a dark hood. But it wasn't him who held the ceremonial sword. Alpha King Matthias stood at the platform's edge, and even in her terror, Era couldn't help but take in the sight of him. He was exactly as the servants' gossip had always described, tall and powerfully built, with shoulder-length black hair and a neatly trimmed beard. His eyes were the color of steel, hard and cold as he looked at her. He wore black leather and furs despite the warm morning, the silver wolf insignia of the royal house prominent on his chest. This was the man who would take her life. A priest stepped forward to offer final rites, his voice droning through prayers Era barely heard. Her heart was pounding so hard she thought it might tear free from her chest. The crowd grew quiet, waiting. Matthias ascended the platform, the ceremonial blade held in both hands. Up close she could see the battle scars on his face, the weariness in his eyes. This was a man who'd seen too much death, done too many hard things, and now he would kill her too. Era of no house, he said formally. You have been found guilty of the murder of Beta Jasper, trusted advisor to the crown and shield brother to the king. Have you any final words? She should beg. She should plead. She should throw herself at his feet and sob for mercy. But Era had spent 3 years making herself small and invisible, and she was so tired of it. If she was going to die, she would die with whatever dignity remained to her. I'm innocent, she said clearly, her voice carrying across the silent courtyard. I didn't kill Beta Jasper. I tried to save him. The real murderer still walks free. Something flickered in Matthias's eyes. Surprise, perhaps, at her composure, or maybe just impatience to be done with this unpleasant duty. Kneel, he commanded. Era knelt, her bound hands clasped before her. From this angle, she could see a figure standing at the back of the crowd. A man with wavy brown hair and an expensive velvet doublet. He was watching intently, and when their eyes met for just a moment, he smiled. The false priest. Lord Cyrus. Understanding crashed over her like a wave. He'd planned this. All of it. The timing, the evidence, the execution date. But why? She didn't have time to puzzle it out. Matthias raised the blade, and Era closed her eyes, waiting for the blow. And then the moon, still visible in the bright morning sky, broke through the clouds. Chapter 2. Moonlight's revelation. The moonlight struck Era's upturned face like a physical blow. It shouldn't have been possible. The moon was barely visible in the bright morning sky, a pale ghost against the blue. But in that moment, it blazed with sudden intensity, sending a beam of silver-white light directly onto the execution platform. The light touched Era's skin, and everything changed. Heat flooded through her body, starting at her face and spreading outward in waves. Not painful, exactly, but overwhelming, as if something dormant deep within her cells had suddenly awakened and was fighting its way to the surface. She gasped, her eyes flying open, and the crowd's hostile faces blurred into meaningless shapes. Her skin began to glow. It started as a faint shimmer, barely visible in the morning sun. But within seconds, the glow intensified, silver-blue light emanating from her face, her neck, her exposed arms. And then the markings appeared. They materialized across her skin like ink bleeding through parchment. Intricate tribal patterns that curved along her cheekbones, spiraled across her forehead, traced down her temples. ancient symbols that looked like a language long forgotten, each line precise and deliberate, as if carved by an invisible hand. The markings continued down her neck, disappearing beneath the collar of her white shift, and wound around her arms in elegant spirals that pulsed with ethereal light. The crowd's angry murmur died instantly, replaced by shocked silence. Era couldn't see what was happening to her own body, but she could feel it. Power thrumming through her veins, her wolf stirring for the first time in her life with a strength that stole her breath. She'd always been weak as shifters went, barely able to sense her wolf's presence. But now it rose within her, ancient and wild, and utterly foreign. The markings burned brighter, and the symbols seemed to move on her skin, rearranging themselves in patterns that hurt to look at directly. Matthias stood frozen, the ceremonial blade still raised above his head, his steel-gray eyes wide with shock. Era met his gaze, and for a moment, the world narrowed to just the two of them. Something passed between them. Recognition, though of what? Neither could have said. His wolf, she realized dimly, was responding to hers. She could feel it. A presence pressing against her awareness. Curious and wary and inexplicably drawn. Then the intensity of the transformation crested, and Ira's vision went white. The sword fell from Matthias's hands, hitting the wooden platform with a ringing clang that echoed across the courtyard. The sound broke the spell of silence, and chaos erupted. People in the crowd were shouting, pointing, some dropping to their knees. Era swayed where she knelt, her bound hands useless to catch herself as darkness crowded the edges of her vision. The last thing she saw before consciousness fled was Matthias reaching for her, his face transformed from executioner's cold determination to something else entirely. Wonder, maybe, or fear. She collapsed onto the platform, and the world went dark. Matthias caught her before her head could strike the wood. His hands, the same hands that had been about to end her life, cradled her with unexpected gentleness as he lowered her unconscious form to the platform. The markings were still visible on her skin, though they'd stopped glowing quite so brightly. In the full light of morning, they were unmistakable. Matthias had seen drawings of such marks in ancient texts kept in the castle library. Illustrations accompanying legends he'd thought were nothing more than stories. But legends, it seemed, could bleed into reality. Luna blessed, someone in the crowd whispered, and the words rippled outward, growing louder with each repetition. Luna blessed. Luna blessed. An elderly man pushed his way through the crowd, his scholar's robes marking him as one of the castle's archivists. His weathered face had gone pale, his eyes locked on the markings with an expression of awe. "My king," he said, his voice shaking. "Those markings. I've studied the old texts my entire life. Those are the symbols of the Luna Blessed, the bloodline that was hunted to extinction 300 years ago during the Great Massacre." Matthias knew the history. Every shifter did. The Luna Blessed had been a rare lineage, Omegas born with the ability to bridge the physical and spiritual realms. They'd been healers, seers, guardians of sacred spaces, and they'd been slaughtered when fear overcame reverence, when people decided such power was too dangerous to allow to exist. "That's impossible," Matthias said, though his eyes told him otherwise. "The Luna Blessed are gone. The last of them died centuries ago." Apparently not. The scholar knelt beside Era's unconscious form, studying the markings without touching her. "These symbols cannot be faked, Your Majesty. They're written in the language of the spirit realm itself, visible only on those carrying the blessed bloodline. If she bears these marks, she is Luna Blessed." Another voice joined the conversation, an aged priestess who served in the castle's temple, her milky eyes suggesting blindness, but seeing far more than most. "There's more, Your Majesty. Luna Blessed are incapable of taking innocent life. Their very nature prevents it. If she bears these markings, she physically could not have murdered Beta Jasper." The words hit Matthias like a blow to the chest. He'd been about to execute an innocent woman. He'd stood over her with a blade raised, ready to end her life, and she'd been innocent all along. The real killer was still out there, still free, still unpunished, and Matthias had nearly completed their work by killing the one person who might hold answers. He had ordered executions before, but never on evidence this thin, never with doubt already gnawing at the edges of his certainty. If the moon itself had intervened to spare her, he would not compound his error by clinging to pride. He would find the truth, even if it meant unraveling his own judgment thread by thread. "Clear the courtyard," he commanded, his voice cutting through the chaos. "All of you, leave. Now." The crowd hesitated, reluctant to abandon such unprecedented drama, but the royal guards moved in to enforce the order. Slowly the courtyard emptied, though Matthias could see faces pressed against windows, people craning for a better view of the unconscious woman on the platform. Cyrus materialized at his elbow, his expression perfectly calibrated between concern and curiosity. "Brother, what's happening? I've never seen anything like this." Neither had Matthias. He looked down at Era's peaceful face, the markings still faintly glowing on her skin, and tried to reconcile this revelation with everything he'd thought he knew. "Get the healers," Matthias said, "and have chambers prepared in the royal wing. Guarded chambers. She stays under watch until we understand what this means." "Is that wise?" Cyrus's voice carried just the right note of caution. "We don't know what she is, what she's capable of. Perhaps the dungeon would be safer." "She's Luna Blessed," Matthias snapped. "She's sacred, and she's innocent of Jasper's murder, which means we have a killer walking free in this castle." He turned to face his brother fully. "You advised me to accelerate the execution." "Why?" Cyrus didn't miss a beat. "You'd been away for weeks, brother. The castle was restless, demanding justice for Beta Jasper's murder. I thought swift action would satisfy them, prevent any conspirators from organizing a rescue attempt." He gestured to Era. "How was I to know she was anything other than what she appeared? A servant caught red-handed with a murder weapon." It was a reasonable explanation. Too reasonable, perhaps. But Matthias's thoughts were scattered, his wolf still agitated by the woman's proximity. He couldn't think clearly, not with her unconscious form in his arms, not with those marks glowing against her pale skin. "Just get the healers," he repeated. 4 servants appeared with a stretcher, but Matthias found himself reluctant to release her. There was something about touching her, about holding her, that made his wolf settle in ways he didn't understand. Finally, he forced himself to lay her carefully on the stretcher. As they carried her away, Cyrus moved to follow, but Matthias caught his arm. "You'll tell no one about this, not until we understand what we're dealing with." "Of course." Cyrus nodded solemnly. "Though I fear word has already spread. Half the kingdom saw what happened here." He was right. There was no containing this. By nightfall, every pack within riding distance would know that a Luna Blessed had appeared in the Alpha King's castle. Matthias watched them carry Era through the castle doors, then turned to look at the spot where she'd knelt, where he'd stood ready to end her life. The ceremonial sword still lay where it had fallen, sunlight glinting off the blade. He'd felt something when their eyes met, just before the transformation. His wolf had recognized something in her, had strained toward her with an intensity that left him shaken. That shouldn't have been possible. He was the Alpha King, the most powerful shifter in the realm, and he'd never had such a visceral reaction to anyone. What was she? Really? And why had Jasper been killed the very night he'd requested her presence in his chambers? Matthias picked up the sword, noting how his hand trembled slightly. Jasper had been more than his beta, more than his advisor. The man had raised him after his parents died, had taught him everything about ruling, about honor, about the weight of responsibility. "I'm sorry," Matthias whispered to the empty air. "I almost failed you. I almost let your killer win, but now he had a second chance." The Luna Blessed woman, Era, was innocent, which meant someone had gone to elaborate lengths to frame her. Someone with access to Jasper's chambers. Someone who knew exactly when to plant evidence. Someone who wanted her blamed for the murder. Someone, perhaps, who'd known what she was before she herself had known. Matthias's eyes drifted to where Cyrus stood, speaking with the captain of the guard, giving orders about increased security. His brother looked every inch the concerned prince, the loyal second in command, but there'd been something in his expression when the markings first appeared, a flash of satisfaction, quickly hidden. as if he'd been expecting exactly what had happened. No. Matthias forced the thought away. Cyrus was his brother, his blood. They'd fought side by side, had built this kingdom together after their parents' deaths. Suspecting him of Jasper's murder was madness born of grief and shock. Still, he would watch. He would be careful. He would trust no one until he knew the truth. In the castle's royal wing, healers fussed over Era's unconscious form, checking her vital signs and murmuring to each other about the unprecedented nature of her condition. Lady Genevieve, the senior healer, shooed the others out after a few minutes, preferring to work alone. She studied the markings in silence, her weathered hands hovering above Era's skin without quite touching. After a long moment, a single tear rolled down her cheek. "Hello, child," she whispered. "I've waited so long to find another. So very long." Genevieve's own hands bore scars, old burn marks that wrapped around her wrists and forearms, scars from silver chains, from a time when being Luna-blessed meant death. She'd hidden for 50 years, had buried her nature so deep that even she sometimes forgot what she'd once been. But she remembered now. Oh, she remembered. The girl on the bed was unconscious, lost in whatever visions the awakening brought. Genevieve knew that journey well. When her own markings had appeared, before she'd burned them away with silver and will and desperate fear, she'd experienced visions of the moon goddess herself, of ancient wolves that walked between worlds, of power that sang in her blood. This girl would wake changed, would wake powerful, would wake dangerous, and whoever had orchestrated Jasper's death would come for her. Genevieve was certain of it. "Rest now," she murmured, pulling a blanket over Era's glowing form. "Rest while you can. The storm is only beginning." Chapter 3. Awakening. Truths. Era opened her eyes to unfamiliar luxury. Silk sheets, a canopy bed with velvet curtains, sunlight streaming through tall windows that looked out over gardens she'd only ever seen from a distance, while carrying buckets of kitchen scraps to the compost heaps. For a confused moment, she thought she was dreaming, that she was still in her cramped servants' quarters imagining what the lives of nobles must be. Then memory crashed back, and she sat up too quickly. The execution, the moonlight, the burning sensation as something ancient and powerful had torn its way through her skin, the silver-blue markings that had appeared on her body, glowing with otherworldly light, the shocked faces of the crowd, Alpha King Matthias dropping his sword. And then nothing. Darkness. Era looked down at her arms, half expecting the markings to have vanished, to have been nothing more than a fever dream conjured by terror. But they were still there, etched into her skin in intricate patterns that seemed to shimmer even in ordinary daylight. The symbols curved along her forearms, spiraled around her wrists, continued up past the sleeves of the clean white nightgown someone had dressed her in. She touched one of the markings hesitantly. The skin felt normal, not raised or scarred, but warm, as if something beneath the surface was generating heat. "You're awake." Era's head snapped toward the door. Alpha King Matthias stood in the doorway, and despite everything, her first instinct was to scramble out of bed and drop into a servant's bow. She made it halfway before her legs gave out, weak from 3 days of unconsciousness. Matthias crossed the room in 3 long strides and caught her before she could fall. His hands on her arms sent a jolt through her system. Not painful, but intense. Her wolf surged toward the surface, responding to his presence with an eagerness that left her breathless. He steadied her, then stepped back quickly, as if the contact had affected him too. "Sit," he said, his voice gruff. "You've been unconscious for 3 days. Your body needs time to recover." 3 days. Era sank back onto the bed, her mind reeling. "Where am I?" "The royal wing." "You're under guard for your own protection." Matthias pulled a chair away from the wall and sat, maintaining careful distance. "I need you to answer some questions." Of course. She was still a suspect, still someone who'd been found with a murdered man's blood on her hands. The markings might have saved her from execution, but they hadn't erased the circumstances of Jasper's death. "I'll tell you whatever I can," Era said quietly. "Your lineage, your family, tell me everything." Thyra shook her head slowly. "There's nothing to tell, Your Majesty. I'm an orphan. I never knew my parents." My grandmother raised me in a small village north of here until I was 14. When she died, I left. I've been moving from place to place ever since, taking whatever work I could find. I came to the castle 3 years ago, and I've worked in the kitchens ever since. And your grandmother, did she ever mention anything about your bloodline? About being special or different? No. She was a healer, knew herbs and remedies. She taught me what she knew, but she never said anything about— Era gestured helplessly at the markings on her arms. About this. Matthias studied her face as if trying to determine whether she was lying. Era met his gaze steadily. She had nothing to hide, no secrets about her past, because her past was exactly as empty as she'd described. After a long moment, he stood and moved to the door. Wait here, as if she could go anywhere else. Era watched him leave, heard him speaking to someone in the hallway. Minutes later, he returned with 3 elderly men in scholars' robes, their arms laden with ancient books. These are the royal archivists, Matthias said. They've spent the past 3 days researching everything we know about Luna Blessed. Tell her. The eldest of the 3 stepped forward, setting his books on a nearby table. His hands shook slightly, whether from age or excitement Era couldn't tell. My lady, he began, and Era almost laughed at the title. The markings you bear are unmistakable. They identify you as one of the Luna Blessed, a bloodline we believed extinct for nearly 3 centuries. But what does that mean? Era asked. What am I? The scholar opened one of his books, revealing an illustration of a woman covered in markings identical to Era's. Luna Blessed are not simply Omegas, though that's the rank they hold within pack hierarchy. They're something older, something that existed before the modern pack system. They're bridges between our physical world and the spiritual realm. Healers, seers, guardians of sacred spaces. Another scholar chimed in, his voice trembling with academic fervor. The texts describe abilities that seem impossible. Sensing truth from lies, healing wounds that should be fatal, finding places hidden by ancient magic. They were revered as gifts from the moon goddess herself. Were, Era repeated, catching the past tense. What happened to them? The third scholar's expression darkened. Fear. 300 years ago, during a period of political upheaval, someone started a rumor that Luna Blessed were using their powers to manipulate pack leaders, to control bloodlines, to subvert the natural order. What started as whispers became accusations, became persecution, became massacre. Within a decade, they were gone, hunted down and killed, their knowledge destroyed, their sacred places burned. Silence fell over the room. Era looked down at her hands, at the markings that proclaimed her membership in a murdered people. But the most important detail, Matthias said, his voice cutting through her shock, is this. Luna Blessed are physically incapable of taking innocent life. Their nature prevents it. If you were to kill someone who didn't deserve death, who hadn't attacked you or threatened the defenseless, your markings would burn away immediately. The spiritual power that sustains them would reject you. Understanding dawned slowly. So I couldn't have killed Beta Jasper. No, you couldn't have, which means someone else did, and they went to great lengths to frame you for it. Matthias dismissed the scholars with a gesture, waiting until they'd gathered their books and left before continuing. The investigation into Jasper's death has been reopened. But until we find the real killer, you remain in danger. You'll stay here, in these chambers, under constant guard. So I'm still a prisoner, just in a nicer cell. You're under protection, Matthias corrected, but his tone suggested he understood the distinction was largely semantic. Whoever killed Jasper knew what you were before you did. They chose you specifically to frame for the murder. That level of planning suggests they're still watching, still dangerous. He was right, Era knew, but being trapped in luxury was still being trapped. After Matthias left, Era spent hours exploring the confines of her gilded cage. The chambers were larger than any space she'd ever occupied. A bedroom, a sitting room, even a small bathing room with an actual copper tub. Servants brought her meals, far finer than anything she'd eaten while working in the kitchens. But guards stood outside her door at all times, and when she tried the handle, she found it locked from the outside. The days began to blur together. Era slept fitfully, her dreams full of strange imagery. Wolves made of starlight, ancient forests that sang with power, the face of an old woman she'd never met but somehow recognized. She'd wake with her heart racing, the markings on her skin glowing faintly in the darkness. And there were other changes. Subtle at first, then increasingly impossible to ignore. She could hear things she shouldn't be able to hear. Conversations happening in rooms far down the corridor. The whisper of wind against stone carrying fragments of words from the courtyard below. When guards stood outside her door, she could sense their emotions bleeding through the wood, their boredom and unease, and carefully hidden fear of what she might be. It was overwhelming, disorienting, terrifying. On the 5th day of her confinement, someone knocked on her door. Not the perfunctory rap of servants delivering meals, but a deliberate pattern. 3 quick taps, a pause, then 2 more. "Enter," Era called, and was surprised when the door actually opened. The woman who entered was perhaps 50, with silver-streaked brown hair and the practical clothing of a healer. Ira recognized her vaguely from her days working in the kitchens. Lady Genevieve, the senior healer who occasionally came to the servant quarters when someone fell too ill to work. Genevieve closed the door behind her and studied Era with an intensity that made her shift uncomfortably. "My lady," Era began, "if you're here to check on my health, I'm not." Genevieve's voice was soft but firm. She moved closer, her eyes locked on the markings visible on Era's arms. "I'm here because I know what you are, because I was like you once." The words hung in the air between them. Era's breath caught. "You're Luna Blessed?" "I was." Genevieve pulled up her sleeves, revealing scars that wrapped around her wrists and forearms. Old burn marks, deliberate and precise. "I was 12 when my markings appeared. My parents, terrified of what would happen if anyone discovered the truth, used silver chains to burn them away. Silver is one of the few things that can destroy the markings permanently, you see. It nearly killed me, but it worked. The markings faded, and I learned to bury my gifts so deep that even I forgot they existed most of the time. Why are you telling me this? Because you need training. Because awakening as Luna Blessed without guidance is dangerous. Because I've spent 50 years in hiding, and I'm tired of it." Genevieve sat in the chair Matthias had occupied earlier, her expression weary. "Also because whoever killed Beta Jasper did so for a reason, and that reason involves you. Jasper came to me a week before his death. He'd been researching Luna Blessed, had found references in old texts to a sacred artifact called the Crystal of Binding. He wanted to know if the legends were true. Are they? Yes. The crystal was created by the first Luna Blessed as a tool to stabilize mate bonds, to protect against corruption of the natural connections between souls. But in the wrong hands, it could be used to break those bonds, to steal power from other shifters. Jasper was convinced someone was searching for it. Era's mind raced. And he was killed before he could report this to the king. Exactly. And you were framed because someone needed to know if you were truly Luna Blessed. The only way to reveal our nature is through extreme stress, usually mortal danger under a full moon. They set you up for execution knowing the truth would come out. But why not just kill me? Why go through such an elaborate setup? Genevieve leaned forward, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. Because Luna Blessed can sense the location of sacred places. We're drawn to them. Whoever killed Jasper needs you alive to guide them to where the crystal is hidden. They just need to make you trust them first. A chill ran down Era's spine. She thought of the false priest who'd visited her in the dungeon. The 2 careful questions about what Jasper had said. The execution scheduled specifically for the full moon. Someone was manipulating events with terrifying precision. What do I do? Learn, quickly. Genevieve stood. I'll visit when I can. Teach you to control your gifts. The most important thing right now is learning to shield your thoughts and emotions. If you can sense others, there's a chance others with power can sense you too. You need to learn to close yourself off, to protect what's in your mind. Over the next several days, Genevieve returned whenever she could steal time away from her healer duties. She taught Era meditation techniques, ways to visualize walls around her consciousness, methods to control the flood of sensory information that threatened to overwhelm her. It was hard, exhausting, But gradually, Era began to gain some measure of control. She learned to dampen the constant awareness of others' emotions, to filter out the background noise of wind-whispered conversations. She learned to make her own thoughts smooth and opaque, so anyone trying to read her would find nothing but calm surface. And she learned about what she was, about the history Genevieve remembered, passed down through her family before fear had forced them into hiding, about Luna Blessed, who'd served as advisors to great leaders, who'd healed plagues, who'd found well springs of clean water during droughts by sensing the sacred pulse of the earth. "We weren't meant to hide," Genevieve said during one lesson. "We were meant to serve, to protect, to heal. But fear turned us into prey." Era understood. She'd spent 3 years making herself invisible, small, forgettable, and now she wore marks that made invisibility impossible. On the 8th day of her confinement, Matthias returned. He looked tired, frustrated, and when he sat down across from her, Era noticed dark circles under his eyes. "The investigation has turned up nothing useful," he said without preamble. "No witnesses, no physical evidence beyond the planted knife. Whoever killed Jasper covered their tracks perfectly. Or they're powerful enough that people are afraid to speak," Era suggested quietly. Matthias's jaw tightened, but he didn't disagree. "I wanted you to know. You're no longer under suspicion. Officially, the charges have been dropped. But I'm still not free to leave. For your own safety." Era nodded, unsurprised. She was valuable now, a rare artifact that needed protecting. Whether that protection was for her benefit or someone else's remained to be seen. After he left, she stood at the window, looking out over the castle grounds. Somewhere out there, a killer walked free. Someone who'd murdered a good man, who'd tried to have her executed, who apparently needed her for something involving an ancient and dangerous artifact. And she was locked in a tower, unable to run, unable to hide, unable to do anything but wait for whatever came next. The moon rose over the castle walls, and Ira's markings began to glow softly in response. She was Luna Blessed, bridge between worlds, vessel of ancient power. She just wished someone had bothered to ask if she wanted to be. Chapter 4. Unveiled Manipulations. The isolation was beginning to wear on Era's nerves. 10 days had passed since her awakening, 10 days of gilded captivity in chambers that grew more suffocating with each sunrise. Genevieve's training sessions provided brief respite, teaching her to control the overwhelming flood of sensations that came with her Luna-blessed nature. But between those stolen hours of instruction, Era had nothing to do but think, and her thoughts kept circling back to the same questions. Who had killed Jasper? Why had they chosen her as their scapegoat? And what did they want from her now? The summons, when it came, was unexpected. A servant arrived at her door bearing a formal invitation. The Alpha King requested her presence at tonight's court dinner, not a request she could refuse, even if the phrasing suggested otherwise. Genevieve helped her prepare, selecting a gown of deep blue velvet that complemented the silver-blue glow of her markings. "Keep your shields up," the older woman advised as she arranged Era's hair. "The court will be watching for any sign of weakness, any crack in your composure they can exploit. Why does Matthias want me there? To remind them what you are, perhaps, or to see how they react to your presence." Genevieve's hands stilled. "Be careful, child. Court is where knives hide behind smiles." The great hall blazed with candlelight, hundreds of flames reflected in polished silver and crystal until the room seemed to pulse with golden radiance. Every noble house in the kingdom had representatives present, their finest clothing on display, their expressions carefully neutral as Era entered. The conversations didn't stop exactly, but they shifted, voices dropping lower, eyes tracking her movement across the marble floor. Era kept her chin high, her steps measured, drawing on every lesson Genevieve had taught her about shielding her emotions. She would not let them see how their scrutiny affected her. Matthias sat at the head of the high table, looking every inch the Alpha King in black and silver. His eyes found hers across the room, and something passed between them. Acknowledgement, perhaps, or warning. Cyrus sat to his right, resplendent in burgundy velvet, his expression perfectly calibrated between concern and curiosity. Lady Genevieve waited at a seat near the middle of the table, and Era gratefully sank into the chair beside her. From this vantage point, she could see the entire hall, could sense the waves of emotion rolling through the assembled nobles. Curiosity, suspicion, fear disguised as fascination. The meal progressed through multiple courses, each more elaborate than the last. Era picked at her food, her appetite destroyed by the weight of so many eyes upon her. Beside her, Genevieve maintained a steady stream of quiet conversation, pointing out various nobles and their political allegiances, giving Era context for the power dynamics at play. Halfway through the main course, Cyrus rose from his seat, goblet in hand. The hall gradually quieted as people realized the king's brother wished to speak. "My lords and ladies," he began, his voice carrying easily across the space. "We gather tonight in celebration of stability restored, of justice served. The villain who struck down our beloved Jasper has been identified and punished." Era's hands clenched in her lap. Punished? She'd been proven innocent. The charges dropped. What was he doing? Cyrus continued, his expression grave. "Yet, I would be remiss if I did not give voice to the questions many of you harbor. Our honored guest appeared in this court for the first time on the very night Jasper was murdered. The Luna-blessed markings revealed themselves only when she faced execution. A convenient salvation, some might say. A miraculous escape from justice." Murmurs rippled through the hall. Era felt anger kindle in her chest, but Genevieve's hand on her arm kept her seated. "Are we to believe in coincidence?" Cyrus asked the room. "Or should we consider that ancient powers might be used for ancient deceptions? I do not make accusations, merely observations. But prudence demands we remember that power, however sacred its origin, can still be corrupted." The silence that followed was heavy with implication. Era looked to Matthias, whose face had gone dangerously still. "You dare question the Luna blessed in my hall?" The Alpha King's voice cut through the quiet like a blade. "You dare suggest that the sacred markings, which cannot be falsified, which have been verified by every scholar and priest in this kingdom, are somehow a deception?" Cyrus spread his hands in a gesture of reasonableness. "Brother, I question nothing. I merely voice the concerns I've heard whispered in corridors, spoken behind closed doors. Better to air such thoughts openly than let them fester in darkness. The Luna Blessed are incapable of murder," Matthias said, each word precise and hard. "This is not speculation or theory. It is documented fact. If she had killed Jasper, her markings would have burned away the instant his blood was spilled. They did not. Therefore, she is innocent. The investigation continues to find the real murderer." "Of course, Your Majesty. I meant no disrespect." Cyrus resumed his seat, but Ira caught the satisfied glint in his eye. He'd accomplished exactly what he intended, planting doubt, making people question her presence, ensuring that suspicion would follow her wherever she went. Era forced herself to eat, to maintain her composure, but rage simmered beneath her carefully controlled exterior. She was not a political pawn to be moved about the board. She was not a convenient scapegoat for someone else's crimes. When the meal finally ended, Ira stood to leave, but Matthias intercepted her before she could escape. "Walk with me," he said quietly, offering his arm. They walked through corridors lit by moonlight streaming through tall windows, guards trailing at a discreet distance. Matthias said nothing until they'd put significant space between themselves and the court. "Cyrus plays a dangerous game," he finally said. "He's trying to turn your people against me, against you, for protecting me." Era glanced at the Alpha King's profile, noting the tension in his jaw. "Why? That's what I intend to discover." Matthias stopped before a heavy oak door. "I need to show you something. But what I'm about to share cannot leave this room." He opened the door to reveal a study lined with books and maps. On the desk lay several documents, letters with broken seals, pages covered in unfamiliar handwriting. "These were found hidden in your old quarters," Matthias explained. "Letters supposedly proving you were part of a conspiracy to assassinate the royal family." Era's blood ran cold. "I never wrote those. I've never seen them before." "I know." Matthias picked up one of the letters, studying it. "The forgery is clumsy, the handwriting inconsistent. The language is wrong. Too formal, too educated for someone who spent 3 years working in the kitchens. And most damning of all, they were discovered too easily, as if someone wanted them found, someone trying to keep suspicion on me, or someone trying to distract from themselves. Matthias set the letter down and turned to face her fully. You've already been proven incapable of murder. Any rational person examining these letters would immediately recognize them as false, which means whoever planted them either doesn't understand how Luna Blessed Nature works, or they don't care about being believed. They just want to muddy the waters, make people doubt, create chaos. Era's mind raced. They need me alive for something, but they also need to control how others perceive me. Exactly. Matthias ran a hand through his dark hair, frustration evident in every line of his body. Someone is playing both sides of this game, keeping you alive but discredited, protected but imprisoned. They want you accessible but powerless. Era moved to the window, looking out over the moonlit gardens. Her markings began to glow faintly in response to the lunar light, and she felt that now familiar surge of power running through her veins. Jasper came to my room that night for a reason, she said slowly. He requested me specifically. What if he was trying to warn me? What if he'd discovered something about my bloodline and was killed before he could reveal it? Then his murderer would have needed to silence him quickly and frame someone who could later be useful. Matthias joined her at the window. Someone with Luna Blessed abilities that the killer would eventually need. The pieces were beginning to fit together, forming a picture that made Era's blood run cold. The crystal of binding. Genevieve told me about it. An artifact that Luna Blessed can sense and locate. If someone wants to find it, they'd need a Luna Blessed to guide them. Matthias's voice had gone grim, which means keeping you alive but under their control would be essential. And making sure you doubt me. Making sure the court sees me as a potential threat. Ensures I can't turn to anyone for real help. Era turned to face him. Who has the power to orchestrate something this complex? Who has access to plant evidence, to manipulate court opinion, to... She stopped, seeing the answer written in Matthias's expression. You already know who, she whispered. Suspecting and proving are different things. Matthias moved away from the window, his shoulders tight with tension. Cyrus is my brother. We've ruled together since our parents died. We've fought side by side, bled together, built this kingdom from the ashes of civil war. If I'm wrong, what if you're right? The question hung between them. Matthias said nothing for a long moment, and Ira could sense the war raging inside him. Loyalty to his blood versus the evidence slowly accumulating against his brother. I need proof, he finally said. Solid, irrefutable proof. Until then, I play along. I keep investigating. I watch and wait. And what do? You stay alive. You keep training with Genevieve. You learn to use your gifts. Matthias met her eyes, and she saw determination there alongside the exhaustion. And you trust no one except me and Genevieve. Can you do that? Era nodded, though doubt gnawed at her. Trust the Alpha King who'd nearly executed her? Trust the system that had thrown her in a dungeon based on circumstantial evidence? But what choice did she have? Over the following days, Era threw herself into training with renewed urgency. Genevieve taught her to extend her senses, to feel the emotional currents of people rooms away, to detect lies in the subtle shifts of heartbeat and breathing. The abilities were erratic, unpredictable, but gradually Era gained more control. She also noticed something else. When Matthias was near, her powers stabilized. His presence acted as an anchor, grounding the wild fluctuations of her newly awakened gifts. She didn't understand why, and she wasn't sure she wanted to examine it too closely. Matthias, for his part, began a careful investigation of his brother. He questioned servants about Cyrus's movements the night Jasper died. He reviewed financial records, looking for unusual expenditures. He watched during council meetings, noting which nobles seemed to defer to Cyrus more than necessary. But Cyrus was careful, too careful. Every answer had a reasonable explanation. Every action an innocent motivation, until the night Era woke to find her door unlocked. She sat up in bed, heart pounding, Luna Blessed senses straining into the darkness beyond her chambers. Someone had been here. She was certain of it. The guards outside should have prevented any intrusion, but she could feel the echo of another presence. the lingering trace of intent that had filled her room moments before. On her bedside table lay a single white rose and a folded note. Ira lit a candle with shaking hands and opened the note. The handwriting was elegant, the message brief. The king's brother walks in shadows. Trust your gifts, Luna Blessed. The truth hides in what is not said. As she read, another image overlaid the careful script. The false priest on the execution platform. Robes too fine for a humble cleric. The almost smile that had never reached his eyes, and the unmistakable profile of Matthias's brother beneath the hood. No signature. No way to know who'd sent it or why. But as Era stared at the note, her markings began to glow more brightly, and she felt a pull, faint but unmistakable, toward the northwest, toward something ancient and powerful calling to the Luna Blessed blood in her veins. The crystal. It was real. And somewhere in her awakening consciousness, she could sense its location, which meant whoever had killed Jasper, whoever had framed her, whoever needed her alive, they would be coming for her soon. And this time, she intended to be ready. Chapter 5. Silver and Truth. The attack came 3 days later, during Matthias's routine patrol of the outer territories. Era was in her chambers when the warning bells rang. Deep, resonant tolls that sent ice through her veins. She rushed to the window and saw guards mobilizing below, horses being saddled in frantic haste, soldiers arming themselves with grim efficiency. Genevieve burst through the door moments later, her face pale. The Alpha King's patrol was ambushed. He's been brought back wounded. They're saying it was rebels from the Eastern Territories. How bad? Era's heart was already racing, her Luna Blessed instinct screaming that something was wrong with this entire situation. Bad. Silver poisoning in the wounds. The healers can't stop it. The toxin is spreading too fast. Genevieve grabbed Era's arm. They're asking for you. Your healing abilities may be the only thing that can save him. They ran through corridors that seemed to stretch endlessly, Genevieve's hand tight around Era's wrist. The castle had erupted into controlled chaos. Servants rushing with boiled water and bandages, guards standing at attention with weapons drawn, nobles clustering in doorways whispering frantically. Era's mind spun with questions. Silver poisoning was rare, the metal difficult to obtain in quantities large enough to coat weapons. Rebels would need resources, connections, advanced knowledge of patrol routes. It spoke of planning, of inside information, of betrayal. They reached the king's chambers to find them packed with people, healers hovering over the bed, council members arguing about response strategies, guards blocking the doorway. Cyrus stood at the bedside, his face a mask of anguished concern, barking orders at anyone within earshot. Let her through. Genevieve's voice cut through the noise with unexpected authority. The Luna Blessed may be his only chance. The crowd parted reluctantly. Ira pushed forward until she could see Matthias on the bed, and her breath caught. He looked like death had already claimed half of him. His skin was ashen, sweat beading on his forehead despite the coldness of his flesh. Dark veins spread from multiple wounds across his torso and arms, the unmistakable mark of silver poisoning working its way through a shifter's system. His breathing was shallow, labored, each exhale sounding like it might be his last. But his eyes were open, and when they found hers, recognition flared in their steel-gray depths. Everyone out, Cyrus announced, his voice heavy with authority. Give the Luna Blessed space to work. If there's any hope. No. Era's voice was sharp. She turned to face Cyrus, her Luna Blessed senses suddenly screaming danger. Lady Genevieve stays, and I need silence to concentrate. Cyrus's expression flickered, just for a moment, with something that might have been annoyance. But he nodded graciously. Of course. Whatever you need. We'll wait outside. The room emptied slowly, nobles and guards filing out with backward glances. Era watched Cyrus leave last, noting how his eyes lingered on Matthias's prone form, how his hand rested briefly on the doorframe as if anchoring himself. The moment the door closed, Genevieve moved to lock it. What are you? He set this up. Genevieve's voice was barely above a whisper. Cyrus orchestrated this attack. I'd stake my life on it. How do you know? Because silver poisoning of this severity requires specific knowledge of shifter physiology. The placement of these wounds is too precise. They're designed to spread the toxin rapidly while avoiding immediately fatal damage. Whoever did this wanted Matthias brought back alive, but dying. They wanted time for something. Era looked down at Matthias, whose eyes had closed, his breathing growing more erratic. Time for what? For you to save him. For you to create a bond. Genevieve moved to the bedside, her expression grim. Luna-blessed healing at this level requires deep spiritual connection. You'll have to open yourself completely to save him. Mind, soul, the innermost parts of your consciousness. And when you do, if there's any natural compatibility between you, a mate bond could begin to form. I don't understand. Cyrus needs you compliant, Era. What better way to ensure your cooperation than to tie you to the king, to make you care about Matthias's survival, to give him leverage over you through that bond? Genevieve's hands were shaking. But it also means if you don't act now, Matthias dies. It's an impossible choice. Era stared at the older woman, her mind racing. Save Matthias and potentially trap herself in a bond that could be exploited, or refuse and let him die? It wasn't a choice at all. Tell me what to do. Genevieve guided her through the process. Hands placed over the worst wounds, breath synchronized with Matthias's failing rhythm. Consciousness extended until Era could feel the poison burning through his system like liquid fire. Her markings blazed to life, silver blue light flooding the room. The pain hit her like a physical blow. She'd expected discomfort, perhaps some sympathetic ache, but this was agony beyond anything she'd imagined. Every burning pathway the silver had carved through Matthias's body, she felt in her own. Every dying cell, every shutting down system. Every moment his wolf struggled to heal only to be beaten back by the relentless toxin. Era gasped, tears streaming down her face, but she didn't pull away. Instead, she poured power into him. Luna-blessed healing that flowed like golden light through her hands, seeking out the silver and neutralizing it molecule by molecule. It was exhausting work. The poison fought back, seemed almost alive in its determination to kill, but Era was stubborn, and desperation gave her strength she didn't know she possessed. She tracked the silver through Matthias's veins, burning it away with pure spiritual energy, watching as the dark lines began to fade from his skin. And then something else happened. Matthias's consciousness rose to meet hers. She felt him there, in the space between waking and dying, felt his surprise at her presence. Their minds touched, and suddenly Era was drowning in memories that weren't her own. She saw Matthias as a boy, watching his parents die in a territorial war. Saw him and Cyrus clinging to each other in the aftermath, two orphaned princes trying to hold a kingdom together. Saw years of battles, of hard decisions, of shouldering responsibilities that would have broken most men. Saw loneliness deeper than oceans, the isolation of power, the weight of a crown that allowed no weakness. And she saw herself through his eyes, not as she'd feared, not as a political problem or a dangerous unknown, but as someone who'd endured her own trials with quiet dignity, someone whose strength came not from power, but from surviving, when survival should have been impossible. The connection deepened, and Ira realized with dawning shock that Genevieve had been right. There was compatibility here, natural and undeniable. Their wolves recognized each other in ways that transcended logic or choice. If she continued, if she completed this healing, a bond would form, fated mate, the rarest and strongest connection two shifters could share. Matthias felt her hesitation, even in his semi-conscious state. He understood what was happening. Don't. His voice whispered through their connection, rough with pain. Don't sacrifice yourself for me. Too late, Era thought back, pouring more healing energy into the last pockets of silver poison. I'm already in too deep to stop. Era, shut up and let me save you. The final traces of silver burned away under the assault of her power. Matthias's wounds began to close, flesh knitting together with supernatural speed. His breathing steadied, color returning to his ashen skin. The dark veins faded completely, leaving only faint scars that would disappear within days. And through it all, that connection between them strengthened, solidified, became something permanent and profound. When Era finally pulled her hands away, she was shaking with exhaustion. Her markings still glowed faintly, but the light was dimmer now, as if she'd poured most of her reserves into the healing. She swayed where she sat, and Genevieve caught her before she could collapse. "Easy, child. You've done more than should be possible." Matthias's eyes opened. Fully aware now, the gray depths clear and focused. He sat up slowly, testing his body, looking down at the rapidly healing wounds with wonder. Then his gaze found Era's. "I felt," he began. "I know." Era cut him off, not ready to discuss what had just passed between them. "How do you feel?" "Like I should be dead." Matthias swung his legs off the bed, standing with only slight unsteadiness. "The amount of silver in those wounds. No one survives that. No one. Luna-blessed healing is different." Genevieve moved to the window, peering through the curtains at the crowd gathered in the courtyard below. "But we have a bigger problem. Cyrus will be waiting for confirmation that you survived. And he'll want to know what happened in here." Matthias's expression hardened. This was no random rebel attack. The ambush was too well coordinated. They knew exactly where we'd be, exactly when. They had silver weapons specifically designed to poison without immediately killing. "Your brother?" Era asked, though she already knew the answer. "My brother." The words came out flat, emotionless. But Era could sense the devastation beneath, through their new bond. And yes, she could feel it now, that subtle awareness of his presence, his emotions. She experienced his grief as her own. Cyrus hadn't just betrayed the kingdom. He'd betrayed blood, brotherhood, everything they'd built together. "We still have no proof," Matthias continued after a moment. "Nothing that would hold up before the council. He's too careful, covers his tracks too well. Then we give him what he wants." Era stood on unsteady legs, her mind working through possibilities. "He orchestrated this attack to force me to save you, to create a bond he could exploit. So we let him think it worked. You want to pretend? I want to use the truth." Era moved closer to Matthias, ignoring how her pulse quickened at his proximity. "The bond is real. He doesn't need to know we're aware of his manipulation. Let him think he's in control. Let him make his next move." Genevieve nodded slowly. "She's right. If Cyrus believes you're both grateful for his support during this crisis, if he thinks Ira is emotionally compromised by the mate bond, and therefore easier to manipulate, he'll accelerate whatever plan he has for the crystal." Matthias finished the thought, his expression grim. "He'll try to move Ira out of the castle, somewhere remote where he can control the situation completely." A knock at the door made them all freeze. Cyrus's voice came through the wood, carefully modulated concern evident in every syllable. "Brother? Is everything all right? May we enter?" Matthias and Ira exchanged a look. Through the bond, she felt his determination, his rage carefully controlled beneath a mask of grateful relief. She gave a tiny nod. "Enter," Matthias called. The door opened to reveal Cyrus, followed by half the council and most of the castle's nobles. They crowded into the room, eyes wide as they took in the scene. Matthias standing, clearly recovered, the wounds on his torso already faded to pink scars. Era sitting nearby, exhausted but alive. "Gods be praised," Cyrus breathed, rushing forward to embrace his brother. "We feared the worst. The healers said the poison was beyond their skill, that nothing could be done. But she saved you. The Luna Blessed saved you." Over Cyrus's shoulder, Matthias caught Era's eye. She saw the acting for what it was, the perfectly calculated display of brotherly love, the gratitude that rang hollow to anyone truly listening. "She did," Matthias agreed, extracting himself from the embrace. "I owe her my life. The kingdom owes her," Cyrus amended. He turned to Era, and for just a moment, she saw satisfaction in his eyes before he masked it. "My lady, you have our eternal gratitude. To think, if we'd executed you as planned." He shook his head as if the thought was too terrible to contemplate. "Fate works in mysterious ways." "Indeed it does." Era kept her voice soft, submissive, playing the role of exhausted healer grateful for acknowledgement. But through the bond, she felt Matthias's dark amusement at her performance. The council members pressed forward with questions, with praise, with political maneuvering disguised as concern. Through it all, Cyrus watched with that satisfied expression, barely hidden. He'd gotten what he wanted. The king saved by Luna Blessed intervention. A bond potentially formed. Emotional leverage secured. He thought he'd won. But as Era caught Matthias's eye across the crowded room, as she felt the steady presence of their connection settling into something permanent, she realized they'd been given a weapon Cyrus hadn't counted on. The bond worked both ways, and through it, they would find the truth. Chapter 6. The Journey North. The announcement came 2 days after Matthias's recovery. Cyrus addressed the full council with grave concern etched into his features, speaking of continued threats from rebel forces and the need to protect their most valuable asset, the Luna Blessed. The attack on the king proves these rebels have resources and intelligence we underestimated, Cyrus said, his voice carrying across the council chamber. They knew our patrol routes, our timing, our vulnerabilities. If they learn of Lady Era's presence here, she becomes a target. We cannot risk losing the only Luna blessed to emerge in 3 centuries. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the assembled nobles. Era sat in the back of the chamber, Genevieve beside her, watching the performance with carefully hidden contempt. I propose we move Lady Era to Northwatch Fortress, Cyrus continued. It's remote, defensible, and far from the eastern territories where rebel activity concentrates. She'll be safe there while we root out this threat. Matthias, presiding over the council from his throne, appeared to consider the suggestion carefully. Through their bond, Era felt his cold fury, but his face showed only thoughtful concern. Northwatch is 3 days' ride from the capital, Matthias said. If we need her healing abilities again, then we'll send for her. But brother, keeping her here puts the entire castle at risk. These rebels have proven they can strike at the heart of our defenses. What if next time they target her directly? Cyrus spread his hands in a gesture of reasonableness. I volunteer to escort her personally, with a full contingent of guards. She'll be as safe as if she remained within these walls. But the kingdom will breathe easier knowing she's beyond the rebels' reach. The council debated for another hour, but the outcome was predetermined. By sunset, arrangements were being made for Era's transfer to Northwatch Fortress, northeast of the capital, in the direction she'd felt the crystals pull. He's moving fast, Genevieve whispered, as they returned to Era's chambers. Faster than I expected. He must sense time running out. Era nodded, her mind racing through possibilities. Northwatch is northeast. The crystal. I can feel it calling from that direction. He's not taking me to safety. He's taking me exactly where he needs me to go. And Matthias can't refuse without revealing he knows the truth. Genevieve's expression was grim. You'll be alone with Cyrus and whatever guards he's chosen. Guards loyal to him, not the crown. Not quite alone. Era touched her chest, feeling the steady pulse of the mate bond connecting her to Matthias. He'll follow. He has to maintain appearances for another day or 2. But he'll come. Will that be soon enough? Neither of them had an answer. The caravan departed at dawn 3 days later. A dozen guards handpicked by Cyrus, supply wagons, and an ornate carriage that would serve as Era's mobile prison. She stood in the courtyard as servants loaded her belongings, aware of the weight of observation from dozens of windows. Matthias descended the castle steps to bid her farewell, and for a moment they stood facing each other while the castle watched. Stay safe, Matthias said formally, but through the bond, she felt different words. I'm coming. Hold on. Thank you for your protection, Your Majesty. Era replied aloud, while sending back through their connection. I'll be ready. Cyrus appeared at her elbow, all solicitous concern. Come, my lady. The journey is long, and I'd like to reach the halfway point before nightfall. Era allowed herself to be handed into the carriage. As they rolled through the castle gates, she looked back once to see Matthias standing on the steps, his face unreadable. Then they turned a corner, and the castle disappeared from view. The first day of travel was uneventful. Cyrus rode alongside the carriage, occasionally checking on her comfort, playing the role of devoted protector with skill that would have been impressive if it weren't so calculating. Era maintained her facade of grateful compliance, speaking little, watching the landscape change from cultivated fields to wilder forests. Through the bond, she felt Matthias's presence like a compass point, distant but constant, growing gradually closer as he followed with his own contingent of loyal guards. They made camp that first night in a clearing beside a stream. Ira was given a tent separate from the guards, comfortable enough but clearly monitored. She lay awake long after the camp quieted, extending her Luna-blessed senses outward, mapping the positions of guards, noting which ones Cyrus spoke to in low voices, identifying the patterns of watch rotations. On the second day, the terrain grew more rugged. Hills rose around them, thick with pine and oak, the road narrowing to barely more than a cart track. Cyrus seemed increasingly energized, checking maps frequently, his earlier pretense of casual protection giving way to focused purpose. During a midday stop, he approached Era's carriage with an expression of studied casualness. "My lady, I wonder if I might ask you something. Have you felt anything unusual during our journey? Any sensations that might be related to your Luna-blessed nature?" Era kept her face carefully neutral. "Unusual how, my lord?" "I've read that your kind can sense sacred places, locations of power. I thought perhaps being so far from the city's distractions, you might notice such things more clearly." His eyes were sharp, watchful, despite the lightness of his tone. She'd been expecting this question. "I feel the natural world more strongly, yes. The forest has a certain vitality to it. But I'm still learning to interpret these sensations. Lady Genevieve was only beginning my training." Of course. Cyrus smiled, but Era caught the flash of frustration he couldn't quite hide. "Well, if you do notice anything particularly strong, please inform me. Such knowledge could be valuable for protecting future Luna-blessed who emerge," as if he cared about protecting anything except his own ambitions. That afternoon, they entered truly remote territory. The road became rougher, the forest pressing close on either side. Era felt the pull growing stronger. Northwest. Always northwest. A magnetic attraction she couldn't have ignored even if she'd wanted to. The crystal was close now, perhaps only miles away, and Cyrus knew it. She could see it in the tension of his shoulders, the frequency with which he checked the maps, the way he kept glancing at her carriage as if trying to read her thoughts through the wooden walls. They made camp earlier than usual that evening, in a clearing that seemed chosen for purposes beyond simple convenience. Era noted how it commanded views of the surrounding terrain, how easily it could be defended, or how easily someone could be trapped there. As twilight gathered, Cyrus requested her presence at the central fire. Era emerged from her tent to find most of the guards conspicuously absent, sent on various errands that left only 3 men, all wearing expressions of barely concealed hostility, standing watch. "Join me, please." Cyrus gestured to a seat across the fire from him. "I thought we might speak more candidly, away from the formality of court." Era sat, every sense alert, the bond with Matthias thrumming with warning in the back of her consciousness. He was still hours away, too far to help if the situation turned dangerous. "You're a fascinating woman, Lady Era," Cyrus began, his voice friendly, but his eyes cold. "Appearing from nowhere, bearing marks thought extinct, saying the king's life. Some might call it destiny. I call it circumstance, my lord." "Do you?" He leaned forward, firelight casting sharp shadows across his face. "Tell me, when Jasper died, what exactly did he say to you?" The question caught her off guard. Era forced herself to remain calm, to remember the lies she'd told in the dungeon when the false priest had questioned her. He spoke of the moon, of bloodlines, but his words were unclear, broken by pain. I couldn't understand most of it. Nothing about artifacts, about sacred places, about crystals. There it was. The real reason for this conversation. The truth he'd been circling since the journey began. Era met his gaze steadily. "He was dying, my lord. If he spoke of such things, I didn't comprehend them." Cyrus studied her for a long moment, and Era felt him trying to read her emotions, to detect any lie. But Genevieve's training held. Her shields remained solid, her surface thoughts carefully constructed to show nothing but confused innocence. Finally, Cyrus sat back with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Of course. I apologize for pressing. These are troubling times, and I find myself suspicious of everything. He stood, brushing dust from his trousers. Rest well tonight, my lady. Tomorrow we reach Northwatch, and you'll be safe at last. Era returned to her tent, her heart pounding. Tomorrow. He planned to make his move tomorrow. Through the bond, she reached for Matthias, sending wordless warning, desperate hope that he was close enough to arrive in time. His response came back steady and certain. Tomorrow. Hold until tomorrow. She spent the night in restless vigilance, dozing only briefly before jerking awake at every sound. The forest around them seemed alive with threat. Shadows moving between trees, the rustle of leaves that might be wind, or might be something more sinister. Dawn came gray and cold, mist rising from the ground to cloak the camp in ghostly white. Era emerged from her tent to find Cyrus already mounted. The camp struck and packed with unusual speed. A slight change of plans, he announced, his pretense of courtesy finally dropping away. There's a site of historical significance nearby that I'd like to show you. A ruin from the time of the first Luna Blessed. I think you'll find it educational. Two of the guards moved to flank Era's carriage as it began to move, their hands resting casually on their weapons. She was no longer a guest being protected. She was a prisoner being transported. The carriage turned off the main road, onto a track barely visible through the undergrowth. Trees closed in overhead, blocking out the weak morning sun, turning the world into a tunnel of green shadow. Era felt the pull growing stronger with every passing moment. They were heading directly toward the crystal's location. After an hour of rough travel, the carriage stopped. Cyrus appeared at the door, no longer bothering to hide his cold calculation. We walk from here, he said. The ruins lie ahead through the forest. You'll guide us. I don't know the way, Era protested. Cyrus grabbed her arm, his grip bruising. Don't lie to me. I've spent 5 years researching Luna Blessed, studying everything Jasper discovered before I killed him. You can sense it. The crystal of binding. You've felt it pulling you since the moment we left the capital. Now you're going to take me to it, or I'll make you watch while I burn this entire forest and everyone in it. The mask was finally off. Era looked into his eyes and saw nothing but ambition and madness. A man who'd murdered his way toward power and would sacrifice anything to achieve his goals. Why do you want it? She asked, stalling for time. Because it's mine by right. Cyrus released her arm and stepped back, his hand moving to rest on his sword hilt. I've been the true power behind the throne for years. I've made the hard decisions, fought the real battles while Matthias played at being the noble king. The crystal will let me take what should have always been mine. I'll break his mate bonds, steal his strength, and rule as I was meant to. You can't use it, Era said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. Only Luna Blessed can touch the crystal. It will reject you. Then you'll use it for me. Or I'll find another way to make it work. Cyrus's smile was cruel. Either way, we're going to those ruins. Now walk, northwest. Don't make me force you. Era had no choice. She left the carriage and began walking, following the magnetic pull that had been with her since her awakening. Cyrus followed close behind, with the 3 loyal guards forming a loose circle around them. Through the bond, she felt Matthias growing closer, felt his urgency and desperate determination. But would he arrive in time? The forest opened suddenly into ancient ruins. Stones worn smooth by centuries, archways that led nowhere, the remnants of what had once been a temple. And in the center, hidden by layers of magic that parted before Era's Luna Blessed presence, stood a sanctuary. The doors opened at her touch, responding to her bloodline. Inside, moonlight somehow penetrated despite the thick forest canopy, illuminating a circular chamber with a pedestal in the center. On that pedestal rested a crystal the size of a fist, pulsing with amethyst and silver light. Cyrus pushed past her into the sanctuary, his eyes locked on the crystal with naked hunger. Finally, after all these years, he reached for it, and the crystal's light flared violently, slamming him backward with a force that threw him across the chamber. He hit the wall hard, gasping in pain. I told you, Era said quietly. Only Luna Blessed can touch it. Cyrus climbed to his feet, blood trickling from his nose, his expression twisted with rage. "Then you'll do it. Take the crystal and give it to me, or I swear." The sound of steel being drawn echoed from the doorway. Matthias stood framed in the entrance, sword in hand, his face carved from fury and betrayal. "Or you'll what, brother?" The Alpha King's voice was death itself. "Threaten her again. Please, give me the excuse." Behind him, a dozen loyal guards poured into the sanctuary. Cyrus looked between them, calculation warring with desperation in his eyes. Finally, he laughed, a bitter, broken sound. "You always were predictable, Matthias. Always the hero, always arriving just in time." He drew his own blade. "Fine. Then we'll settle this the old way, as brothers should have settled it years ago." Chapter 7. Sacrifice and Shattered Bonds. The sanctuary held its breath as the two brothers faced each other across ancient stone, years of shared history and recent betrayal, heavy in the air between them. Era stood frozen near the crystal, feeling the power radiating from the artifact pulsing in rhythm with her own heartbeat. "It didn't have to be this way," Matthias said, his voice rough with emotion. "We built this kingdom together. We survived our parents' deaths together. How could you throw all of that away?" Cyrus circled slowly, sword held in a fighter's stance. "Throw it away? I've been building toward this for years while you played at being the beloved king. Every decision you made, I corrected. Every weakness you showed, I compensated for. I've been the true power all along. You were just too blind to see it. You murdered Jasper. He was like a father to us both. He discovered my plans. He had to die." Cyrus's expression showed no remorse. "Just as you have to die now. The kingdom needs a leader willing to do what's necessary, not a sentimental fool who clings to outdated ideals." Matthias's wolf surged beneath his skin, power rippling through the air. "Then come and kill me, brother, if you can." They moved simultaneously, swords clashing with a sound like thunder. The fight was brutal and immediate. No circling, no testing, just two highly skilled warriors trying to end each other. Cyrus fought with desperate fury, all his resentment and ambition channeled into every strike. Matthias fought with cold precision, each movement calculated. But Era could feel through their bond the agony of fighting someone he'd once loved. The guards who'd come with Cyrus moved to intervene, but Matthias's loyal soldiers blocked them, and suddenly the sanctuary erupted into chaos. Steel rang against steel, men shouted and grunted, the smell of blood began to fill the air. Era pressed herself against the wall near the crystal's pedestal, trying to stay out of the way. Through the bond, she felt every blow Matthias took, every near miss that could have been fatal. The brothers were evenly matched. Years of training together meant each knew the other's techniques, could predict the other's moves. But Cyrus was fighting without honor. He used tricks, feints, deliberately targeted old injuries he knew Matthias carried. And when Matthias hesitated for just a moment, still unable to fully commit to killing his own brother, Cyrus exploited that weakness. His blade sliced across Matthias's ribs, drawing blood. The Alpha King stumbled back, and Cyrus pressed his advantage, raining down blows that forced Matthias into a defensive position. "You were always too soft," Cyrus snarled. "Too concerned with being good when you should have focused on being strong." Era couldn't just watch. She reached for the crystal without thinking, her Luna-blessed nature responding to the artifact's call. The moment her fingers touched its surface, power exploded through her. Ancient, vast, overwhelming. Vision slammed into her consciousness with brutal force. She saw the massacre of Luna-blessed 3 centuries ago, saw them herded into this very sanctuary and slaughtered, saw their leader, an old woman with marking identical to Era's, standing before this crystal with tears streaming down her face. "We created this to protect," the ancient Luna-blessed whispered in the vision. "To strengthen the bonds that make us whole, to guard against corruption and destruction. But fear has turned us into prey, so I give you this final safeguard. If one of our bloodline willingly sacrifices herself to protect the crystal, its power will be distributed among all true mate bonds in the realm. It will become untouchable, uncorruptible, forever beyond the reach of those who would abuse it." The vision released her, and Ira gasped, understanding flooding through her. This was the answer. This was why the crystal had called to her. Why destiny had placed her here at this precise moment. She could end Cyrus's threat forever. She could ensure the crystal's power could never be stolen or corrupted. All it would cost was her life. Across the sanctuary, Matthias was losing. Cyrus had him pinned against a wall, sword at his throat, victory gleaming in his eyes. Any last words, brother? Yes. Matthias's gaze found Era's across the chaos. Through their bond, she felt his love, his regret, his desperate need for her to run, to save herself, to not do whatever foolish thing he could sense her considering. I'm sorry. Sorry? Cyrus laughed. For what? For failing to see what you'd become. For not stopping you sooner. For... Enough. Cyrus drew back his blade for the killing strike. For caring about you when I should have cared about the kingdom. Matthias finished quietly. Era made her decision. She wrapped both hands around the crystal and spoke the words that had appeared in her mind during the vision. Words in a language she'd never learned but somehow understood. I offer my life to protect this gift. I give myself willingly so that what was meant to heal cannot be twisted to harm. Accept my sacrifice and fulfill your purpose. The crystal blazed with light so bright it turned the sanctuary white. Cyrus spun toward her, his face contorting with rage and realization. No! What are you... Power erupted from the crystal in waves that knocked everyone to their knees. Era felt it pouring through her bloodline, through every cell in her body. The crystal began to crack, fissures of light spreading across its surface. Matthias fought his way to his feet, stumbling toward her. Era, stop! Don't do this! But it was already too late. The crystal shattered into thousands of fragments, each one blazing with amethyst and silver fire. The pieces shot outward like shooting stars, passing through the sanctuary walls as if stone didn't exist, spreading across the kingdom and beyond. Era collapsed, the effort of channeling that much power overwhelming her system. She felt the fragments reaching every mated pair in the realm, felt bonds strengthening, felt the natural connections between souls becoming unbreakable. The crystal's power, once concentrated in a single artifact, now lived in the hearts of thousands. And it had rejected Cyrus completely. One of the fragments shot directly at him, and when it struck his chest, he screamed. The power burned through him, seeking any mate bond it could strengthen, and finding nothing but ambition and corruption. His shifter abilities, already strained by his attempt to touch the crystal earlier, shattered under the assault. He crumpled to the ground, gasping, his eyes wide with horror as he felt his wolf die inside him. Not dead, but broken. Forever unable to shift, forever cut off from the source of his power. Matthias caught Era before she hit the ground, cradling her against his chest. She could barely keep her eyes open, her strength draining away as the price of her sacrifice came due. Why? Matthias's voice cracked with anguish. Why would you do that? Had to. Era whispered. Only way. To keep it safe. Only way to stop him. There had to be another way. There had to be... No. She managed to lift one hand to his face, feeling through their bond his devastation, his rage at the unfairness of finally finding his fated mate only to lose her. This was always meant to be. The crystal called me here for this purpose. The sanctuary began to collapse around them, the ancient magic that had preserved it for centuries fading as the crystal's power dispersed. Matthias lifted Ira and ran, his guards clearing a path, the entire structure groaning as stones began to fall. They burst out into the forest, just as the sanctuary imploded behind them, burying Cyrus under tons of rubble. Matthias heard his brother's screams cut off abruptly, and something in him broke. Not grief for what Cyrus had become, but mourning for what they'd once been. Genevieve appeared through the trees, having traveled with Matthias's contingent, her healer's bag already in hand. She took one look at Era's pale face and closed eyes, and tears began streaming down her weathered cheeks. No, 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 the old healer whispered, pressing her fingers to Era's throat, checking for a pulse. The sacrifice was supposed to kill her. The old text said, "She's alive," Matthias said fiercely. "I can feel her through the bond, weak but alive." Genevieve worked quickly, pulling out herbs and tinctures, checking Era's vital signs with shaking hands. The sacrifice drains the life force completely. Even if she's alive now, she won't be for long unless... She stopped, her eyes widening as she noticed something. Era's markings, which should have faded with the crystal's destruction, were still glowing, but the color had changed from silver blue to pure gold, pulsing with a light that seemed to come from within. Impossible, Genevieve breathed. One of Matthias's guards knelt beside them, an old soldier who'd served the kingdom for decades. My lord, I've seen something. Look. He pointed to his chest, where a small fragment of the crystal had embedded itself, glowing softly beneath the skin over his heart. My mate. I can feel her clearer than ever before. She's 200 miles away in the capital, but it's as if she's standing right here. The bond is stronger than it's ever been. Around them, other soldiers were discovering the same thing. Those who had mates felt their connections blazing with renewed power, unbreakable and eternal. And Matthias, looking down at Era's unconscious form, realized they'd been hit by a fragment too. The mate bond between them, already strong from her healing of his silver poisoning, had become something transcendent. A connection so deep, it felt as if they shared one soul between two bodies. She's not dying, Genevieve said slowly, checking Era's pulse again. She's transforming. The sacrifice was accepted, yes, but the crystal, or what it represented, chose to preserve her, changed her into something new. What does that mean? I don't know. This has never happened before. Luna blessed who made the sacrifice always died. But Era? Genevieve shook her head in wonder. She's the first in 300 years to awaken. Perhaps the magic recognized that the bloodline couldn't afford to lose her. Perhaps her fated mate bond with you created an anchor strong enough to hold her soul to this world. Or perhaps destiny simply wasn't finished with her yet. Era stirred in Matthias's arms, her eyelids fluttering. When her eyes opened, they'd changed. Still amber, but with flecks of gold that caught the light, giving them an otherworldly quality. Did it work? She whispered. Yes. Matthias pressed his forehead against hers, overwhelming relief flooding through him. The crystal is safe. Its power is distributed. Cyrus can never use it. You did it. Good. She smiled faintly. That's good. Don't ever do something that reckless again. Can't promise that. Her eyes drifted closed again, but this time it was clearly just exhaustion, not the approach of death. I'm Luna Blessed. Reckless is apparently in the job description. Despite everything, the battle, the betrayal, the near loss of his mate, Matthias found himself laughing. It came out wet and broken, but it was real. They made camp in the forest that night, unable to travel with Era in such a weakened state. Genevieve monitored her constantly, documenting the changes in her markings, the new abilities that seemed to be emerging as her transformation completed itself. You can sense bonds now, Genevieve explained the next morning when Era was strong enough to sit up. Not just emotions or lies, but the actual connections between mates. You can see them, feel their strength, know when they're true or false. The crystal gave you its essential purpose. You've become its living embodiment. Era looked at her golden markings, still processing what had happened. And Cyrus? Dead, Matthias said quietly, buried under the ruins, his wolf destroyed by the crystal's rejection. Even if he survived the collapse, he's no longer a shifter. He's broken. The words carried weight. Not satisfaction, but acknowledgement of a terrible necessity. Matthias had lost his brother twice. Once to ambition, once to death. The grief would take time to process. Over the next 2 days, they made their way slowly back toward the capital. Word had already spread of what happened. Fragments of the crystal had reached every corner of the kingdom, and people were discovering the strengthened bonds, the unbreakable connections between true mates. Some called it a miracle. Others called it the Luna Blessed's gift. All agreed that something fundamental had changed, that the world was different now than it had been before Era's sacrifice. When they finally reached the castle, the entire kingdom turned out to greet them. Era rode beside Matthias, no longer hidden or protected, but acknowledged as what she truly was, Luna Blessed, mate to the Alpha King, the woman who'd saved them all. The changes would come slowly, Era knew. Acceptance would take time. But as they passed through the castle gates, and she saw hope in the faces of the people who'd once called for her execution, she felt something she'd never experienced before. She felt like she belonged. Chapter 8. Golden Dawn. Era woke slowly, her consciousness surfacing like a dreamer reluctant to leave peaceful depths. Sunlight streamed through windows she recognized, the royal chambers she'd occupied during her captivity. Though the word felt wrong now. Captivity implied unwillingness, and she'd chosen to stay in the castle after their return 2 weeks ago. Chosen. That word felt powerful in ways it never had before. She sat up carefully, still learning the limits of her transformed body. The sacrifice had changed her in ways Genevieve was still cataloging. Her Luna-blessed abilities had amplified, her connection to the spiritual realm deepened, and her golden markings now pulsed with power that ebbed and flowed with the moon's cycles. But the most profound change was internal. For the first time in her 23 years, Ira felt complete, the emptiness she'd carried since childhood. That hollow space where family and belonging should have resided had been filled by something stronger than blood, purpose, choice, love. Through the mate bond, she felt Matthias in the council chambers below, working through the complicated aftermath of Cyrus's betrayal. There were nobles to reassure, alliances to rebuild, a kingdom to convince that stability could exist, even after such devastating treachery. Ira rose and dressed, choosing a gown of deep green that Genevieve had commissioned for her, clothing appropriate for a Luna-blessed who would soon be acknowledged as the Alpha King's mate. The official bonding ceremony was scheduled for 3 months hence, giving the kingdom time to adjust to the revelation that their ruler had found his fated mate in the woman once condemned for murder. A knock at the door interrupted her preparations. "Enter," she called. Genevieve swept in, carrying her ever-present healer's bag, and wearing an expression of barely contained excitement. "Good. You're awake. I have news. Good news, I hope. The best." Genevieve set her bag down and pulled out a leather-bound journal. "I've been researching your transformation, comparing it to every text we have on Luna-blessed history. And I've found something extraordinary." Era sat, gesturing for the older woman to continue. "The sacrifice you made wasn't just accepted. It was honored. The crystal recognized that the Luna-blessed bloodline had been reduced to just 2 living souls, you and me. It couldn't afford to lose you, not when the gift had only just begun to re-emerge in the world." Genevieve opened the journal to a page covered in cramped handwriting. "So, it changed the nature of the sacrifice. Instead of taking your life, it transformed you into something more, a living repository of its power. You're not just Luna-blessed anymore, Era. You're the keeper of bonds." "What does that mean?" "It means you can do more than sense mate bonds. You can strengthen them, help heal relationships that have been damaged, guide those who've lost their mates through grief. The crystal's essential purpose, to protect and nurture the connections between souls. That's yours now." Genevieve's eyes shone with tears. "You've become exactly what the world needs." Ira absorbed this slowly, feeling the truth of it resonate through her transformed nature. Over the past 2 weeks, she'd noticed her abilities evolving. She could sense not just the presence of mate bonds, but their quality, could feel when couples were struggling or thriving, could even offer comfort through some mysterious mechanism she didn't fully understand. "The responsibility will be shared." Genevieve squeezed her hand. "You're not alone anymore, child. You have Matthias, you have me, and soon you'll have others. I've already received word that 3 young women in the outer territories have manifested Luna-blessed markings since the crystal's power dispersed. The bloodline is awakening again." Hope bloomed in Era's chest. "Truly, truly, we can rebuild what was lost. Create a new order dedicated not to hiding, but to serving. Train these young ones to use their gifts without fear." Genevieve's expression turned serious. "But first, we need to solidify your position here. There are still nobles who question whether someone of your background should stand beside the Alpha King." "I was a kitchen servant falsely accused of murder," Era said dryly. "I can see why they might have concerns. You're Luna-blessed, mate to the Alpha King, and the woman who saved this kingdom from a tyrant's ambition. They'll accept you because they have no choice, but we can make them embrace you through action." Genevieve stood. "Which is why I'm suggesting you establish formal audiences. Let people come to you with their problems, their questions about mate bonds, their requests for guidance. Show them that Luna Blessed exists to help, not to hoard power." It was a good idea, a necessary one. Era nodded slowly. "I'll speak with Matthias about setting it up." After Genevieve left, Era made her way to the council chambers. Guards nodded respectfully as she passed, no longer watching her as a prisoner, but acknowledging her as the Alpha King's chosen mate. The shift in attitude had been gradual, but unmistakable. She found Matthias exactly where she'd sensed him, standing before a large map of the kingdom, with several advisors clustered around. He looked up when she entered, and something in his expression softened. "My lords, we'll continue this afternoon," he said, dismissing the advisors with a gesture. When they were alone, Matthias crossed to her and pulled her into an embrace. Through the bond, Era felt his exhaustion, his lingering grief for the brother he'd lost, but also his gratitude for her presence. "Genevieve told me about the new Luna Blessed emerging," she said quietly. "Good news travels fast." Matthias stepped back, but kept his hands on her arms. "The council wants to meet them, evaluate whether they pose any threat. They're children awakening to powers they don't understand. They need guidance, not evaluation. I know, which is why I've already told the council that all Luna Blessed will be under your direct protection. They'll answer to you, train with you, learn from you." Matthias smiled faintly. "I may have also suggested that anyone who threatens them will answer to me personally." Era found herself smiling back. That must have gone over well, about as well as expected. "But they'll adapt. They always do." His expression grew more serious. "There's something else. We've received word about Cyrus." Era's smile faded. "He survived? Barely. He was pulled from the ruins by some of his remaining loyalists. But Era, he's broken. His mind is fragmented, his wolf destroyed. He can't shift, can barely speak coherently. The healers say he'll live, but he'll never be what he was. What will you do with him?" Matthias was silent for a long moment, the weight of the decision evident in his eyes. "Exile. Permanent banishment to the furthest reaches of the kingdom, under guard, with no possibility of return. He'll live out whatever remains of his life knowing he lost everything. His power, his position, his purpose. Death would be kinder, but I want him to remember what his ambition cost. It was a harsh sentence, born of betrayal and grief, but Ira couldn't argue with it. Cyrus had murdered Jasper, tried to kill Matthias, would have destroyed the kingdom to serve his own ambitions. He deserved no mercy. "When?" she asked. "He leaves tomorrow." Matthias's voice was hollow. "I won't see him off. I can't." Era wrapped her arms around him, offering silent comfort through the bond. Some wounds would take years to heal, if they ever truly did. The next 3 months passed in a blur of activity. Era established her audiences as Genevieve had suggested, meeting with couples struggling in their relationships, with individuals searching for their fated mates, with families torn apart by old grievances. Her golden markings would glow as she listened, as she sensed the bonds between souls and offered guidance drawn from instinct and the crystal's lingering wisdom. Word spread quickly. The Luna Blessed who'd saved the kingdom was using her gifts to heal it, one relationship at a time. People who'd once called for her execution now sought her blessing. Nobles who'd questioned her worthiness fell silent as they watched her work. The 3 newly awakened Luna Blessed arrived at the castle, 2 girls of 14 and 15, and a young woman of 19. They were terrified, their families uncertain whether to celebrate or mourn their daughter's awakening. Era took them under her protection immediately, working with Genevieve to teach them control, to help them understand their gifts, to ensure they would never face the persecution their predecessors had endured. "You're not weapons," she told them during their first lesson. "You're not threats. You're bridges between what is and what could be. Your purpose is to heal, to protect, to nurture the bonds that make us whole." The youngest, A shy girl named Petra, with markings that spiraled down her arms in patterns of silver and blue, asked the question they all wanted answered. But what if people fear us again? What if what happened before happens again? Era showed them her golden markings, still glowing softly in the afternoon light. Then we face it together. We don't hide anymore. We don't make ourselves small to ease others' fears. We stand proud in what we are, and prove through our actions that Luna Blessed are gifts, not curses. On the night before the bonding ceremony, Era stood alone in the castle gardens, looking up at the full moon. Her markings responded to its light, glowing brighter, and she felt the presence of Luna Blessed past, the ancestors who'd been slaughtered, the bloodline that had nearly been extinguished. "I hope I'm making you proud," she whispered to them. A warm presence materialized beside her, not physical, but spiritual. The ancient Luna Blessed from her vision, the one who'd created the crystal's final safeguard, stood translucent in the moonlight. "You've exceeded every hope we held," the spirit said gently. "You've done more than survive. You've ensured the future. The bloodline lives, the gift is honored, and the bonds you'll protect will strengthen the world for generations. I'm just one person. You're the first. There will be others. You've opened the door we thought closed forever." The spirit smiled. "Tomorrow, you bond with your mate. You'll stand beside the Alpha King not as a decoration or a political alliance, but as an equal partner. You'll establish the new order of Luna Blessed. You'll teach what we can no longer teach. And when your time comes to pass on, there will be others ready to carry this forward." The spirit faded, but her words remained. The bonding ceremony took place under the full moon in the castle courtyard, before an audience of thousands. Era wore white silk embroidered with silver thread that caught the moonlight and made her seem to glow. Her golden markings were on full display, no longer hidden or feared, but celebrated. Matthias stood waiting for her at the altar, looking every inch the Alpha King in formal black and silver. But when their eyes met, Era saw past the crown and the title to the man beneath, the one who'd saved her life, who'd believed in her innocence, who'd become her partner in rebuilding what had been broken. The bonding ritual was ancient, words spoken in the old tongue that Era now understood through her Luna Blessed nature. They exchanged vows, marking each other with ceremonial silver that would leave permanent symbols. A wolf for Era, a moon for Matthias, visible proof of their eternal connection. When the ritual concluded, and Matthias kissed her before the assembled kingdom, the mate bond between them blazed with golden light, visible to everyone watching. Gasps and cheers erupted as people witnessed the physical manifestation of a fated mate connection. Rare, sacred, unbreakable. The celebration lasted 3 days, but for Era, the most meaningful moment came on the morning after the ceremony, when she woke in Matthias's arms and realized she'd found what she'd been searching for her entire life. Home, family, belonging. Not through blood or birth, but through choice and courage and love. 5 years later, Era stood in the newly established Luna Blessed Sanctuary, a beautiful building of white stone and crystal windows built on the site where the old temple ruins had stood. 7 Luna Blessed now lived there, ranging in age from 10 to 50, all training in their gifts under Genevieve's and Era's guidance. "Mama!" A small voice called from the doorway. Era turned to see her daughter racing across the sanctuary floor, her blonde curls bouncing with each step. Aylin was 3 years old and had been born with golden Luna Blessed markings already visible on her skin, proof that the bloodline was not just surviving, but thriving. She scooped up her daughter, feeling the familiar pulse of Luna Blessed power that lived in both of them. "What is it, little moon?" "Papa says the northern ambassadors are here. They want to see the Luna Blessed. More visitors seeking guidance, seeking help, seeking the wisdom only Luna Blessed could provide." The sanctuary had become a destination for people from across the kingdom and beyond, all wanting to understand the mysterious gift that had re-emerged in their world. Era set Aylin down and took her hand. "Then we should go greet them properly." As they walked back toward the castle, the young Luna Blessed students following behind, Era reflected on how far she'd come. From condemned prisoner to the Alpha King's mate, from kitchen servant to keeper of bonds, from orphan to mother, teacher, protector of an ancient gift. The kingdom had been reformed. Justice systems were overhauled to prevent false accusations like the one that had nearly killed her. Luna Blessed were not just accepted, but honored. Their abilities recognized as the gifts they'd always been meant to be. An Era, once invisible and powerless, now stood at the center of it all, not because fate demanded it, but because she'd chosen to stand when she could have fallen, to fight when she could have surrendered, to sacrifice when she could have saved herself. The moonlight had revealed her truth that day on the execution platform, but she'd spent every day since proving that truth meant more than just survival. It meant changing the world.